Yeah. Good evening. Today we're learning Maseches, Megillah, Daf Yud and Yud Amud Aleph. We'll be stopping 3 lines before the bottom of the page of Yud Amud Aleph. And at least as of now, until the meteorologists in the room tell me what the weather is on Shabbos, we're planning to learn Daf Yomi on Shabbos morning at 8 a.m. per the announcements. On that morning, we'll spend 45 minutes learning Yud Amud Beis and Daf Kaf. As you can see, those pages are, I guess, what we could call normal sizes, give or take. Hopefully that won't play out into very difficult sugyas. So says the Gemara, we are about a third of the way down on Yud Amud Aleph. We're starting at the words Mikan va'elech, which is about 4 lines above the very wide lines on Yud Amud Aleph. And says the Gemara, what had we been talking about until now? Yesterday's sugya was about the structure and organizational flow of the Shmona Esrei. Why Avos before Gvuras, why Gvuras before Kedusha, Tachonin, v'chule, all the way through Shmona Esrei, based on Psukim, based on Svaras, v'chule. So then the Gemara says, that's all great and wonderful. However, what if I feel like I want to praise HaKadosh Baruch Hu more? Says the Gemara, Mikan va'elech asher l'saper b'shvacho shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You're not allowed to praise Hashem any more than is found inside the Shmona Esrei. Not allowed. To Amar Rabbi Elazar, my dichsiv, what does the pasuk say when it says, Mi emalel gvuros Hashem yashmiya kol tehilaso? What does the pasuk mean when it says, who can articulate the strengths of Hashem? Who can make heard all of his praise? So how does the Gemara darshan this pasuk? A very important drasha. Who is the one who has the right to articulate Hashem's strengths? Only only if you can be exhaustive in regards to how great Hashem actually is. But if you're not able to do that, and we're not able to do that, so then we should not be doing that. And Amar Rabba Bar Chana, and he takes it a step further in the name of his Rebbe, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Last short line, Yud Amud Aleph. If a person gets into this phase of like the high levels of compliments, one after the next, about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, ne'ekar min ha'olam, he gets a punishment. Not because we don't love HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but because we're barking up a tree that we can't climb. We can't even get to the bottom of the skin of the foot of the body that is able to represent HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore, we're not allowed to do so.
But then why do it at all?
So Anshe Knesset Agdola had the formula because they had Nevi'im. They knew what they were doing. They knew what the upper limit was. And they based it. We didn't learn this yesterday, but like even Hakel Agadol, Gibor Ve'anora, all of that is rooted in Psukim. It's not stam. The language is very, very, very particular, especially in the primary 3 brachos and in the closing 3 brachos, which are very similar for all religions, as it were. The ones. Yes, a little. But the ones in the middle, I have a lot of latitude. But as David pointed out, and as I think we all know, most of the chasimas of those brachos are the same. But Anshe Knesset Agdola wrote it; they knew what they were doing. But we're balabatim. We're even if we're Talmidei Chachamim, we're not allowed to be adding there, and that is ne'kar min ha'olam. What is the text proof for this? Shene'emar hayisupar lo. Can we speak about him? Ki adaber imamar ish ki yivula. You'll be swallowed. Darash Rabbi Yehuda ish kfar gvuraya. Ve'amri la ish kfar gibor chayil. We don't know which Rabbi Yehuda was. Was he from Gibor Raya or was he from Gibor Chayil? We don't know. My dichsiv l'chadu miyasehila. What does it mean to you? Silence is praise. Sama dekula mashtuka. The drug for everything is silence. Kiyasa Rav Dimi, when Rav Dimi came to Eretz Yisrael, Amar, he said as follows: Amre b'ma Rava, in my hometown, what they said in Eretz Yisrael was mila besela. If a word was worth 1 unit of money, mashtuka betrain. I'll pay you double to be quiet, because silence at times can be more powerful than speaking. Maybe in most cases, probably. I don't know. It depends what we're adding to the mix. Otherwise, it's probably better to stop talking. 3 lines down into the wide lines and Yud Amud Aleph. Kra al peh lo yatsa. So this is the bar mitzvah boy challenge. Sometimes when you have a kid who knows their parsha by heart, I knew my bar mitzvah parsha cold, but at the start of my bar mitzvah, I could have looked up in the air. I could have been rolled to the wrong parsha. I would have done fine. But that's also, you have to read from the Ksav. That's what the Gemara here is talking about in regards to the Megillah, Kra al peh lo yotza, that you're not yotze by reading by heart. But how do we know this? Halfway down, Yud Amud Aleph, Minolan, what is the Marei Makom that teaches us that we can't read it by heart? Amar Rava, Asya Zechira, we have Gzera Shavak. Sivhacha here by the Megillah, it says V'hayomim ha'elaniz karim, and then V'chsivhasam it says over there by Amalek Ksov Zos Zikaron Basefer Malahalan Basefer. Just like over there we have the mitzvah of reading Parshas Amalek. So then Malahalan Basefer Avkan Basefer. That's what transfers over the Gzera Shava bridge. We have a bridge teaching us from the world of Amalek to the world of Megillah that we have to actually read it bipeh. Says the Gemara. we have to read it bepeh from a cloth. It has to be b'sefer. Says the Gemara, how do we know about Amalek? That in regards to Amalek, that kriyahi, who says anything about reading? The pasuk doesn't say that it has to be read. All it says is dilma iyun ba'alma. Maybe it's just that you have to read it. But who says you have to actually read it out loud? We wouldn't be able to learn about Megillah from Amalek if by Amalek we have no obligation to read it. Who cares if the words are there? We're talking about reading Baal Peh. Can you or can you not read Baal Peh? So answers the Gemara, lo sel kadaitach. That is not possible. The Gemara says dichsiv, but that does not make sense. It should be detanya. The reason we know it's detanya is because it's not just a pasuk that's quoted. It's a drasha on the pasuk, and that is not dichsiv. That is detanya. The Brisa writes, zachor yachol balev. I might have thought that the word zachor means only in your heart. Shehu omer lo sishkach. But when we have another pasuk that speaks about not forgetting, then that pasuk of lo sishkach hare shikchas halev amor. And if that's true, Hamani Makayim Zachor, what does the word Zachor mean? It has to be Bepeh, but from a Sefer. And that's what we transfer over in the Gzeira Shava, that just like we have in one case the word Zechira, and in another case the word Zechira, one by Megillah, one by Amalek, they both have to be by Sefer, they both have to be Bepeh. That is how we know that we are not allowed to read the Megillah by heart. Says the Gemara halfway down at one of the two dots, about 6-7 lines into the wide lines on Yud Ches Amud Aleph, Kara Targum lo yatsa, that if you read Targum, if you read the translation, you are not Yotze. Says the Gemara, Hechi Dami, what is the case? Ilema dechsiva mikra v'kari la Targum. If the actual Megillah was written in Hebrew, and you're reading a translation of that, you're on the English side of the art scroll, and it was in the days of Achashverosh, so says the Gemara, that can't be the case. Hainu al peh, that's the previous case of reading by heart. You're not reading what's in the book. You're reading something on your own. Says the Gemara, you've misunderstood. What is the case of reading Targum? Lo tzricha tichsiva Targum v'kara la Targum. It's written in French and you're reading it in French. That's what's happening and nothing else. Says the Gemara, quoting another part of the Mishnah, aval koran osel lo azos bilaz, that whatever language you are, whatever you need to hear in the language you understand is allowed. We're Americans. What if we heard it in English? The Queen's English, Canadian, it doesn't matter. Any English is fine. We understand it. Maybe with an Australian accent, we'd still understand it. How is it written? So says the Mishnah, you're allowed to do that. But that doesn't really make sense. And I foreshadowed this question to drop yesterday, the Amris, but we had said in our Mishnah, we said in the earlier part of the Mishnah that if you say it in any language, you're not yotze. And now we're saying over here, as long as it's lo azos bilaz, if you read it for the foreigner in his language, he's Polish, you're reading it in Polish, that's your yotze. That's a stira. You can't have both ways. It says the Gemara, Rav Shmuel Damrei Tarbayu, that when we say bilaz, when we say that there's a foreign language, it's only speaking about Yevani. We learned about this about 10, 15 blot ago. And this was the Shita, as we will see in detail again today, the Shita of Rashbag, that we are allowed to write Sfarim, Sifrei Tanakh, in Greek, not because the Greeks were special, but because of a drasha in Psukim, as we saw many blot ago. So it says the Gemara, Hechi Dami, what is the case of the Yevani? Ilema dichsiva ashuris v'kar la Yavanis. If the Megillah is written in proper Hebrew, but we're reading it with Greek, so then the same as before, Hainu al peh, that can't be the case because that's the same thing as reading it al peh, just reading it by heart. Says the Gemara, that's not what's happening. Amar Ravacha, Amar Belazar, sheksuba belaz Yavanis. It's written for a foreigner in Yavanis, and everything is kafta rafarach perfect. Says the Gemara, interjecting only because we just said Amar of Acha the Amar of Elazar. Now we're going to quote another quote from him that has absolutely nothing to do with our Gemara at all. We'll come back to our Gemara in just a couple of lines. The Amar of Acha Amar of Elazar. Again, this was one of the memory tricks that they did, is that they would group the comments of an Amora in one spot. So what is this one? So Minayin Shekara Kadosh Baruch Hu Yaakov Kael, that Yaakov was referred to with the name of Aleph Lamed. Very strange. I didn't know this until I read this Gemara yesterday. Shenemar vayikra lo Kel Elokei Ruchos. He was called Kel Elokei Ruchos. Kel Elokei Yisrael. What did I say? Ruchos? Is that a pasuk somewhere? It must be somewhere. That's so funny. Okay. Yeah. What is that? Okay. Okay. There's a synapse in my brain that enjoyed the word Ruchos. Oh, okay. Very good. I don't remember. But now I'll actually read the word in front of me because that's why you can't be Korah al Peh. I'm just highlighting a pedagogy. I'm just showing how it's done. So we can't. So says the Gemara.
What was that word? A pedagogy?
Says the Gemara that he was called Aleph Lamed. Shneimar vayikra lo Aleph Lamed, Elokei Yisrael. Hashem called him Aleph Lamed. Yaakov, Vayikra Lo, Yaakov was called Aleph Lamed, and by Elokei Yisrael. The Yisal Kadaitach, that it was the Mizbeach that was being spoken about in that pasuk, that Yaakov was referring to the Mizbeach, Karale Yaakov Aleph Lamed, that he referred to the Mizbeach as Aleph Lamed. That can't be, because then it should have said Vayikra Lo Yaakov, that Yaakov referred to the Mizbeach as that, Mibayle, which it didn't say. Ella, it must therefore be Vayikra Lo Le Yaakov Aleph Lamed, that he was given the name of Kel. Again, what does this mean? God, a deity, Aleph Lamed, and from like Alim, called Alim Gvar, strong, Umikro Aleph Lamed, who called him that, Elokei Yisrael. That's pshat in the pasuk. Vayikra Lo. He was called Aleph Lamed by who? Elokei Yisrael. That's how the pasuk reads. Now, back, that was a parenthesis. Back to our discussions, 2/3 of the way down, halfway through the wide lines. Says the Gemara, Meisve, we have a brisa that's going to question our assumption about writing in Greek. Says the Gemara, Kara giftis, Ivris, Ilmis, Madis, Yavanis, if it's read in any of those languages, Lo Yatsa. But you just told me about 45 seconds ago that it was totally acceptable to do it in Greek. What does it say over here? That by Yavanis Lo Yatsa? So which one is it? Halodamya, this is not really comparable. Elulaha, it really needs to be read like this. Giftis legiftim, the language of giftis for those from giftim. Ivris leivrim, Hebrew for those who are from Ivrim. Rashi here writes, I think it's Rashi, writes that they're from Aram Nahar, Aver Hanahar, that's where they're from. We saw this reference earlier. Ilmis leilmim and Yavanis leyavanim yatsa. So it's not to say, it just means you just can't read in those languages for people who don't understand them. You can't just say, oh, we're reading the Megillah in Giftis this year. You can't do that because nobody understands it. And we'll get to some of the details about how much you have to understand to be Yotze. Says the Gemara, if this is true, that all of these languages can be read this way, then Rav and Shmuel, a little bit earlier, Ihachi, Rav and Shmuel, what's the magic of saying that our Mishnah is talking about Yavanis? Any language in Laz you can be Yotze. It doesn't matter what it is, as long as you understand it. So says the Gemara, Lukma b'chol Laz. It could be any language. Ela masnisim kibraisa. Really, our Mishnah is right like the brisa that it can be in any language. And when Rav and Shmuel were talking about Yavanis, itmar de Rav Shmuel be'alma itmar, they were just picking one language out of the hat. Says the Gemara, Rav Shmuel da amrei tarvayu Laz Yavani lachol kasher. That reading it in Greek is perfectly fine, but that's a problem. Vaktani Yavanis liyavanim in l'kulei alma lo. So if Rav and Shmuel are going to say that you're allowed to read in Yavanis, that the brisa is very difficult because the brisa implies that can only be for someone who's Greek, someone for whom that's their a language that they understand. Says the Gemara, no, really what's happening here is that Rav and Shmuel, inhu, they hold the Amar Kerashbag. They hold like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, Detnan, as we learned earlier in the Maseches, Rashbag, Omer Av Svarim Lo Yitir Shichtav El Yavanis. That when it comes to Svarim, we hold that they can be written in both Hebrew and in Greek.
Is that only like, real Yavanim, or is it
anyone who understands Greek?
So it could be.
This assumption of Rashbag is that even if you don't understand it, you'll be Yotze. We'll discuss that in a minute, actually, about being Yotze when you don't understand. We'll see soon a very important ha'ara about the Megillah, one that is almost more grand than any of the words on the page of the Megillah, because you can be Yotze even if you don't understand everything, which is good because a lot of us don't understand everything.
Same thing with the Torah, right?
Same thing with the Torah, but that's a little different because that has a category of what's called Chovas HaTzibur. So Chovas HaTzibur is not a Chovas HaYachid. So there are times when I've asked Shilas to Rabbanim, it's okay for you to miss Shabbos davening this week for reasons X, Y, or Z, whatever, like a vacation. When I remember I asked a Shilah once, I remember what it was. We were supposed to go up to Lake George. Never ended up happening. We were supposed to go up to Lake George, but we were going to be missing all of davening. There's no minyan there. So I asked a Shilah back in the day. This was probably almost 20 years ago, 18 years ago. And my Rebbe in YU at the time, Rabbi Yaakov Neuberger, said it's a Chovas HaTzibur, it's not a Chovas HaYachid, you can go. But that's not true by Megillah. By Megillah, you'd have to read it on your own if there was no tzibur. So it's a little different. But similar idea. You don't have to understand every word to be Yotze, but you have to hear every word. Anyways, the Gemara says, if all of this is true, if the way we're understanding Rav and Shmuel is that really they hold like Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, then v'leimer halacha kirashbag. Forget your own opinion, Reb Shimon of Rav and Shmuel. You're not helping at all. You're making things more confusing. Just say that we hold like Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, that you're allowed to write in Yavanis. Says the Gemara, we couldn't do that. Halacha kirashbag. If we would have said that the halacha is like Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, I might have thought that that was only true by scrolls of Al Megillah. But when it comes to the Megillah itself, I would not have thought that because the pasuk says that the Megillah has to be written as it's supposed to be written, namely in Ksav Ashuris, so then Emalo, I might have thought that Rashbag doesn't apply here, and then that it can't be written in Yavanis. Kamash Malon comes along Rav and Shmuel to make sure that we don't make such an error, and we therefore assume that it can be written even in Yavanis. This is a difficult sugya to paskin on. You have to really spend a lot of time piecing together every little section of Gemara about what language it can be written. This takes time. So we don't have the time for this, but the pashtus, when we stop right now, we'll see that the Megillah can be written in Hebrew and in Yavanis, and we'll see a little bit more about this on the top of the page. Says the Gemara, Behaloes sheshama ashuris yatsa. Let's say that a foreigner who hears Hebrew, so let's say you have your Baal Tshuva American, he doesn't understand Hebrew. He just became from yesterday, and today's Purim. So everybody's going to shul. He's sitting there in the back of the room. He doesn't understand a lick. He doesn't understand anything. So says the Gemara, I don't understand. He's a foreigner. He doesn't understand the Hebrew language. You're reading the Megillah and Ksav Ashuris. The guy's an Amhar Doraisa. He doesn't know the first thing about Hebrew. So says the Gemara, what's the difference between that? At that time, women were far less educated than they are today. And you have women and children and Amei Haaretz who are uneducated. It doesn't say children. Women and Amei Haaretz, they didn't know what was going on in the Megillah either. They didn't understand the flow of events other than knowing the story from day schools if they went Bichlal. Nowadays, all of our girls go to school. It's a totally different world. Says the Gemara, they don't understand either. So Maskif Lo Ravina Atu Anan, do we eat? This is such a great question. He says, what's your point in the first place? Do you think that we rabbis know what the following means? Atu Anan, do we understand do we know exactly what this means, these words? So our school will translate them for you, but be'etzem, really what's going on? They didn't know. Ella, and this is a huge yisod by the mitzvah of Megillah. Ella mitzvahs kriya upirsume nisa. You don't have to know every word. You don't have to know conceptually any words as long as it's written in Ksav Ashuris or in Yavanis. And then even if you sit there and listen, you're accomplishing something by sitting there, which is that those who do understand it, it's Pirsume Nisa, and highlighting the miracles of this. So Hachanami, just like over there by the greats who don't know what Achashtaranim, I can't even read it, B'nai Ramachim, they don't know what that means. Hachanami, in regards to those who don't speak Ksav Ashuris, they don't know Hebrew, mitzvahs, kriyas, Pirsume Nisa, that is the big yesod of this as well. And we'll speak about this more in a little bit about people who fell asleep in the middle, possibly of Megillah. How can you still be Yotze? You're not possibly paying attention if you're sleeping. Doesn't matter. I mean, it matters to a degree. We have to define sleep. We're going to define it shortly. And we've seen this many times in Shas already, but we'll define that shortly. But we're seeing here a very big yesod. It's all about Pirsume Nisa, nine lines or so at the two dots from the bottom of Yud Ches and Aleph, just a lot of words we're getting there. Kara Serugin Yatsa. If you read it in chunks, in other words, if you pause in the middle and then continue, you are still Yotze. How long of a pause can you have? We'll get into that on the top of the next page. When they saw the Mishnah, they weren't sure what the word Seirugin means. What does Seirugin mean? So says the Gemara, they learned from the best possible place, from the maidservant in Rebbe's house. Shamuha le'amsa debe Rebbe. They were in the house of Rebbe, and the maidservant was there. She was saying to the rabbis, they were coming in groups. They weren't all coming in as one entourage. They came in separate chunks. Would you guys all show up at once? It's a cold, drafty house. Everybody get in the house at the same time. I want to open the door once. So what did everybody learn? Seirugin meant with breaks. We read the Megillah with breaks. So that's how they answered that. Lo habiyade, another thing they didn't know. Lo habiyade rabbanan, my chaloglagos. We saw this Gemara somewhere earlier. What are chaloglagos? They didn't know. So let's see. Shamula Amsa de Rebbe. They saw the maidservant of Rebbe. De Amra Leila Gabra. She said to a certain man, to have a vader par pechine, who was sprinkling out some herb, some vegetation. I think the art scroll calls it purslane. I know it's an herb. I don't know what it is, but this guy was spreading it around. And she said to him, oh, then they learned from the Amsa de Rebbe. They learned from his maidservant what chalog legos are. And another thing they learned was a very important thing. So what does this mean? This pasuk says, if you look at the pasuk, salsaleha usromameka techabedcha ki sechabkena. So this is talking about lofty things. How will you grasp onto greatness? But they didn't know what salsaleha means. So then what happened? Shamu amsa de Rebbe. They heard her talking yet again. Tahavas amra. She was saying lahu gavra tahava mahapech b'mazye. He was playing with his hair, trying to make it look all beautiful. He was turning it this way and rubbing it and curling it and messing around with it so that it would look nice. Amra le, she said to him, how How long are you going to mess around with your hair for? So then they learned, how do you become usiro memecha? You're misalsil. You take the Torah, you turn it over, you analyze it, you pick it up, you try to understand it better, you mess around with it, you test it, you read, you ask shilas. That is how you become a great. Next, 4 lines from the bottom. They didn't know what the word Yahavcha meant. One time, I was traveling with an Arab merchant. I was carrying something very heavy. He said, take your Yahavayich, which now we know means is a burden, and throw it on to the donkey. Now, if we go back to the pasuk, 1 line higher, throw your burdens onto a Kadosh Baruch Hu. At the end of the day, Lamaisa, when it comes to who we are and what we think we're capable of, we're all very, very, very limited. We can do what Hashem wants us to do sometimes. That's if we have enough self-discipline. But in order for us to be matzliach at all, that's not on us. That's all HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We are megalgal and aliyadei zakai. We're good people. We try to do good things, and hopefully good things happen because of us. That's great. But Lamaisa, hashleicha l'Hashem yahavcha, when things are difficult, we throw our burdens to Hashem and ask Him for help. 2 lines from the bottom, one last one, and then we'll come back to our sugya of things that we learned from the Amsa de Rebbe. What the pasuk meant when it said "V'tati isei v'matata hashmeid," a reference to the destruction of Yerushalayim. What does the word ta'atea mean? So Shamua Amsa de Rebbe Tahavas Amr lechaverta. She said to one of her friends, "Shkule tatise v'tate besa." Go take the broom and sweep the house. So the type of destruction was a sweeping type of destruction in Yerushalayim, and meta'atea today is even in modern day Hebrew is a broom. The Biur Halacha has a whole discussion. Are you allowed to sweep your house on Shabbos? Because back in the day when they didn't have tiles or wood, standard flooring like we all have, normal, everybody has it. So then if you were to take a broom and do a broom on a dirt floor, that's mashvegumos. That's an Isser Dorais of Choresh, a told of Choresh. That's not allowed at all. And even if, for example, your sukkah is outside on grass, you are not allowed to take a broom and smooth out remove dirt that way. You can pick it up with your hands, but you can't take a broom because by definition, it's going to move dirt around and smooth it out. So these are some of the halachos with the broom. So the shayla and the biur halacha was, do we have a gzeira from non-floored houses to floored houses, thereby not allowing us to sweep on Shabbos? If you really don't like sweeping on Shabbos, you can say Easter Polig. There are some people who don't agree with the Mishnah Berurah, but it's not really true. We're allowed to because the standard in our culture is that we have flooring. Last 4 lines on Yud Ches Amud Aleph. We'll turn to a thinner page, Tanu Rabbanan. Somewhat thinner page. The rabbis have taught us this is a brisa similar to our Mishnah. Kara Seirugin. We are allowed to read with breaks in it, and we learned Seirugin was with breaks. Yotze, your Yotze, top of Yod Ches Amud Beis. But Seirusin, what does Seirusin mean? Rashi says Divrei Maschil Seirusin Lemafreya, but to read out of order Lo Yotze, as we saw in our Mishnah. And then Rav Muna adds in as follows: Rav Muna Omer Mishem Reb Yehuda Af B'Seirugin. Even when you're reading with breaks, it's not always mutter to read with breaks. It has to be that Im Shakte Ligmor Eskula Chozer LaRosh. That if you pause long enough to finish the Megillah, then you have to start over again. That's a long pause. But let's say L'dugma, a person has to go to the bathroom, and they go to the bathroom and it's long enough of a break. He's the Balkori. He's not missing any words, but the break was long enough that one could have read the whole Megillah. He has to start from the beginning. Rabbi Yosef, halacha ki Rav Muna shamar mishum Rabbi Yehuda. We do have this limitation on B'seir again on taking breaks in the reading, that we have to make sure that the break is not to finish the entire Megillah. But the Gemara asks a brilliant, simple question. 4 or 5 lines down, Yud Ches Amud Beis. Amar le'abai Rav Yosef. When we say that if you take a break, that you have to start over again, is that more as kula, that you have to finish the whole thing? What if I only have 5 psukim left, 10 psukim left? How long does that take? A minute? So if I take a minute break, I have to start over again. I only have 6 psukim left. So the Gemara says, do we say that type of break is the break that ruins your Megillah and you have to start over? O Dilma, does the break have to be long enough to complete the whole Megillah? Me'reisha l'seifa, which one is it? Great question. The Gemara answers, Amar le, it has to be me'reisha l'seifa. It has to be a break. Let's say it takes 25 minutes to read the Megillah with this particular Balkori. It has to be that way. And says the Gemara, a line that is used throughout Shas in a whole host of places, the Imkain, Nasata devarecha l'shiurin. You have subjected your words to measurements. What does that mean? Well, that means that we don't have a standard amount of what is considered an interruption. We don't know what that is. Because if you're in the first parak, your break is X number of prakim. If you're in, what are there, 10 prakim? I think there's 11 prakim in 10 prakim in the Megillah. So you have, if you took a break after the first parak, you have 9 to go. You take a break in the 9th parak, you have 1 to go. That break is not the same. So therefore, the Gemara says it doesn't work that way. However long it takes for a person to read the Megillah, that's how long the break would have to be in order to ruin the reading of the Megillah. Now, how do we paskin? Do we paskin like this shita of Rav Muna? This is subject to a machlokas Rav and Shmuel, and then a machlokas about how to understand Rav and Shmuel. Says the Gemara 7-8 lines down. Yud Ches Amud Beis Amar Rabbi Abba Rabbi Yirmeh Bar Abba Amar Rav halacha ki Rav Muna. So in the name of Rav, he says the halacha is like Rav Muna. Ushmuel Amar Ein halacha ki Rabbi Muna. Shmuel says the halacha is not like him. In other words, the break can be even longer than that. The Surah Masnu Hachi. That's how they taught it in Surah. The Pumbedisa Masnu Hachi. They taught it a little differently in Pumbedisa. That Amar Rav Kahana Amar Rav halacha ki Rav Muna. Shmuel Amar Ein halacha ki Rav Muna. Very similar. And then here's the flip. Rav Bibi Masni Ibcha. Rav Bibi reversed what Rav held about Rav Muna and what Shmuel held about Rav Muna. Rav Amar Ein halacha ki Rav Muna. Rav was the lenient one. Rav says that we don't have the parameter that was added by Rav Muna. In other words, if you read B'sei Rugen and you take a break, you could take a 2-hour break. We don't care. You can finish the Megillah afterwards without starting over. Shmuel Amar halacha ki Rav Muna. And in fact, says the Gemara, 1/3 of the way down, Amar Rav Yosef, Nekot Rav Bibi biyadcha. We should follow the assumption of Rav Bibi that Shmuel is the one who holds like Rav Muna, that Shmuel is the one who says that if you take a break long enough to go Mereisha L'Seifa from beginning to the end, that you have to start over. Why would we assume that? To Shmuel hu dechayish liyechida. Shmuel, whenever there's a machlokas between the Rabbanan and the Das Yachid, and the Das Yachid is makbid, he's more machmir, Shmuel follows that shita. Where do we see this? T'tnan. This was scary to see a Mari Makam from Maseches Yevamos. It's a little scary. What? It was like a warning, it's coming. So it says the Gemara, what was the case where we see that Shmuel is the strict one when there's a Das Yachid who's strict against the Rabbanan? The case was the Shmuel who dechayish li'chidan, a case in Maseches Yevamos. T'tnan, the Mishnah writes, Shomeres Yavam, a Yavama is a woman whose husband Nebuch passed away without children, and she has an obligation, or her husband's brothers have an obligation to marry her. So she's waiting to get married, and after her husband dies, her husband's brother, instead of getting married to her, proposes to this Yavama's sister. Not a very good political move, but that's what he did. Shekidesh achiv es achosa. The brother of the guy who died, who should have proposed to the Yavama or done chalitza, he said, you know what, I'd rather go for this woman's sister, for the Yavama's sister, so he proposed. So Mishum Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira Amru Omrim Lo, we tell him, Hamteina Shiase Achicha Gadol Maisa. You have to wait until something else happens. This was a strict shita. And Amar Shmuel, we're not going to get into this sugya, we'll learn it in a couple of months, in a long time. In March, I think we're starting in Yevamos. Says the Gemara, Amar Shmuel Halacha Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. So what do we see? That Shmuel holds like the strict shita Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. So we see that when there's a Das Yachid that's strict against the shita of the Chachamim that's lenient, that Shmuel is always strict. That makes more sense to say, like Rabbi Bibi in our sugya, to say that Shmuel was of the opinion that that he held that, like Rav Muna, that we have a restriction by Seirugan, and the restriction is that if you take a break that's long enough, you have to start over from scratch. Halfway down Yud Ches Amud Beis says the Gemara, Tana Rabban and the rabbis. Oh no, Tana Rabban and the rabbis have taught us is not good. Hishmid bas sofer osios. If the sofer left out some letters, psukim, he left out full psukim. Ukran hakore kimeturgaman hamatargem yotza. Wow, you're missing something in the Megillah. When we lay in Haftarah, we're not makbid on the letters at all. A lot of them are very faded. If you look in the Haftarah books that we have, a lot of them are faded. But he still says you're yotze. How can that be? Meisive says the Gemara, hayuba osios metushtashos. If there were letters that were very blurry or kind of almost scratched out, o mikuros, or letters that were actually torn. Im Rishuman Nicker, if the letter shape is still recognizable, then Kshera, no problem at all. Vim Lav Psula, but if not, then it's puzzle. This does not work. How can it be that letters are missing? They need to be Rishumos Vinikaros, they need to be at least recognizable. So how can it be that that's correct? So it says Gemara, Lokasha Habakutla Habimiksasa. No, these two brises are talking about different things. No machlokas between them. Tanu Rabban, and the rabbis taught us almost exactly halfway down, a little bit more. Hishmid Ba'akore Pasuk Echad. Lo yomar ekra eskula. If somebody left out one pasuk, he should not, or if he missed one pasuk, he walked out for a minute, whatever it was, he should not say ekra eskula. I'll read the rest of the Megillah, and ve'achar kach ekra oso pasuk. I'll come back later and read the pasuk that I missed. That's lemafreya. Elakora me'oso pasuk ve'ilchi. He has to go back to that one pasuk and continue reading. That's why if somebody does go to the bathroom in the middle of Megillah, you read from where you left off. Don't skip it, because otherwise you're not yotze. And as well, you walk into shul halfway through the Megillah. Lo yomar ekra chetzia matzibur. I'll read the second half with the tzibur ve'achar kach ekra chetzia, and then I'll go back and read the first half. Ella kore osamit chilasa ve'ad sofa. Next two dots. How do we define misnam nem yatza? A person is taking a nap. Sometimes we do these things. We fall asleep when we're sitting down. Or standing up. So says the Gemara, how do we define this? So says the Gemara, Amar Avashi nim velo nim. You're sleeping, but you're not. Tir velo tir. You're awake, but you're not. Dekar leva ani. When they say your name, you respond. Velo yoda la'adurei svar. But you can't say anything that's cogent, anything that's really significant. Midkar. But if you remind them of something, then they'd be able to respond in kind. Next, one last short line. Hayakosva dorsho magia in kiven liboyata. That if a person is writing or editing or really writing a Megillah, and they read it as they're moving along, they're yotze. But says the Gemara, what is going on here? Hey chitami. How do we look at this? Either kamasader psuka b'kasavla. If he knows the whole thing by heart, he's reading pasuk by he finishes reading it by heart, and then he writes it down. If that's what you're going to say as to how he was yotze, how can that be? He wasn't reading anything that was written. He said it by heart before he wrote. He's the sofer. They don't have a Megillah yet, and this is Yud Dalet. Kikive and libo, my happy. Who cares? Al pehu. He did it all by heart. You can't be yotze that way. Ella says the Gemara, last middle width line, the kasab suka v'karila. After he wrote each pasuk, he was yotze. It says the Gemara still, umi yotza. If you only write the first pasuk and read the first pasuk, then you write pasuk number 2 and you read the second pasuk. If that doesn't work, Amar Rabbi Chalbo, we'll see this quoted a little bit later today on the next Amud. Amar Rav Chama bar Gomer, Av halacha k'divrei Omer Kula, that the mitzvah, the requirement of the Megillah, is to hear the entire Megillah mitchila v'ad sofa. So if that's true, how can you say that if you've only written one pasuk at a time that you're yotze? It doesn't work. And as we'll see in the next Amud, according to the Shita that says that we only have to read the Megillah from Meish Yehudi, that we only have an obligation to read the Megillah from there, which is the second parak of Esther. We have such a Shita. Even that Shita requires that the whole Megillah be written. You can't be yotze the Megillah. Reading from a partially written Megillah doesn't work. Ella says the Gemara, it must be that this guy in the Mishnah who was reading and writing, he had a full Megillah in front of him that he was copying from. He had a full proper Megillah resting in front of him, and he was reading from that one psuka, and then he was copying it. Fine, then you're reading from a real Megillah, no problem at all. Good to go. Then says the Gemara, maybe this idea, the fact that he had a second Megillah sitting in front of him, maybe lema misayeya le Rabbi bar bar Chana, Amar Rabbi bar bar Chana, Rav Yochanan, maybe this idea supports the Shita Rav Yochanan. He says, Aser lichtov os achas shalom min aksav. We are very makbid on this with Sefer Torah, that you're not allowed to write anything in a Sefer Torah without looking at another Sefer Torah that has been verified as kosher. So says the Gemara, this is not a raya at all. Maybe this particular case of the Megillah, Dilma, the Israme le Isramuye, just he happened to have a Megillah in front of him. It was for convenience, but maybe had he known it by heart, good to go. So says the Gemara, we need to analyze that. 12 lines from the bottom. Gufa Amar Rabbi bar Chana Rav Yochanan. Aser lichtov os achas shalom min aksav, that it is forbidden for one to write anything without copying. And Meisve, that's not necessarily true. Reb Shimon ben Elazar, Maisa Reb Meir shahalach la'aber shana be'asya. Reb Meir went to go be ma'aber the shana. We know it happened 7 and 19 years that were ma'aber the shana by adding Adar Sheni. He went to Asya, to this particular city, but it was on Purim, v'lo hayasham Megillah. So what did he do? He's Talmud Chacham, the Kos from Elibo v'Kara. He wrote the whole thing by himself. He grabbed a quill, he grabbed some cloth, no problem. He's got Tanakh down Baal Peh. So says the Gemara, that's not a right. You can't bring a proof from him about that. Amar Rabbi Abahu, Shani Reb Meir, de Mekayim Bey, he has fulfilled the following. Apecha yaishiru negdecha. Your pupils will be straight in front of you. Amar le Rami bar Chama le Reb Yirmiyah. What does that mean? Midifti, excuse me. What does that mean? Ma'eva apecha yaishiru negdecha, that your pupils are straight in front of you. Amar lo elu divrei Torah. This is talking about Torah. When a person's eye is tired, they have nothing left anymore. So Lemaisa, when you're not pounding the books and you're not being a masmid, you're not gonna know everything. This is Reb Meir we're talking about. And even if Reb Meir slept, and I'm sure he slept to a minimum, miyushar mehin eitzel Reb Meir, he knew everything by heart. So says the Gemara, Rav Chizda Ashkechel Rav Chananel dehava kasav svarim shalom min aksav. He saw that Rav Chananel was writing things shalom min aksav. He was writing Sifrei Tanakh without looking and by copying. He was just doing it by heart. So Amar Le, he said, really, really, you should be able to do it by heart. And the rabbis put an injunction on this. You're not allowed. So then the Gemara asks its kasha against Rav Meir. Once we know that technically speaking it could be written that way, but we don't. It implies that Rav Chananel was a Talmud Chacham etzlo. Rav Meir kasaf. Rav Meir shouldn't have been allowed to write. We just learned from Rav Chananel that Rav Chananel was not allowed to write without copying, even though he was miyusharn, even though he had the whole Torah right in front of him. I know people who know Tanakh by heart. One of Rabbeim, not directly, but indirectly, when I was in Smicha, the guy across running a yeshiva there, every single, he's like a little kid from Zilberman's. He knew every single pasuk, Kisidron, in all of Tanakh. He does 20 prakim of Tanakh every single night with his wife. They come home, they pound 20 prakim a night. 20 prakim. A lot. This person told me that his brother knows every single Tosfos in Shas, it doesn't matter, in some huge small cut of Torah, much more than we know. I don't know any Tosfos by heart. There's zero. It doesn't help at all. They're not a normal family. 20 prakim a night. Anywhere you start, he knows full pshat in every pasuk, Rashi, Radak, you name it. He's got it all down cold. Unbelievable. So can he write the Megillah by heart? In his sleep, he could write it, but it's Nisr Darabanan. You should not be doing that. So how did Rav Meir do it? The Gemara answers, Shasad Chak Shani. What was the case with Rav Meir? No choice. We have to be Ma'aber the Shana. Being Ma'aber the Shana affects everything. It pushes off Pesach, it pushes off Dinei Doraisa. We need to nail this down properly. It's got to be done right. We're in charge of this. It's Shasad Chak. Therefore, he was allowed to do it. But otherwise, correct. It's not appropriate for one to copy down anything in the Torah without copying, to write a Sefer Torah without copying from another. 4 lines from the bottom. Abaye allowed the Bei Rabbi Chavu, they were Sofrim, to write tefillin and mezuzos without copying from another thing. Kiman, who is this like Ki Haitana, like the following opinion. The Tanya, Rabbi Yirmiyah Omer, Mishum Rabbeinu, says in the name of Rabbeinu, which is Rebbe, tefillin and mezuzos nechtav shalin aksav and tzrich and sirtut. So we learned the first part is the part that we need, which is that these things don't need to be copied as they are written, and as well, the tefillin and mezuzos do not require sirtut. They do not require the etched lines in the parchment to make sure that the writing is straight. Tefillin ain't tzrich and sirtut. We don't paskin like him entirely. It's true that tefillin don't require sirtut, but mezuzah tzrich and sirtut, mezuzos do require. And and yes, correct. You can write tefillin and mezuzos bal peh. Why? Says the Gemara, my time, because migras grisen. Everybody knows them by heart. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. We can all do it in our sleep many times over, no problem. Now we don't know Kadesh and V'Hayaki V'Echad as much as we should. There is in the art scroll, they have it there for us to read. I used to do that when I was younger, and I should still, but I don't. Does anybody still do it? I don't know. You seem the type, David. Yeah, thought so. Says the Gemara, last line on Yud Chesed Beis. Haisa Ksuva B'Sam. We said that there were 4 types of ink that cannot be used. Sam, says the Gemara, is Sama. Rashi indicates with commentary, not in the Rashi directly, that it's actually a gold lettering. It's a gold lettering. And that's not allowed. Sikra is red. Amar Rabba Bar Chana Sikra Sashma. That's just the name of it. It was a red dye. That's what Rashi says. 2 lines from the bottom. Tseva Adam Shetsovim Bo Trisin. That's what painters would use. Kumus Kuma. Rashi says this is Sraf Ilan. It was sap from a tree that was used as an ink. Top of your Testament Aleph. Kan Kantum. What was that ink? That was Charsa de Ushchafi. This is something that we totally would have done had we not been told it was restricted. Shoe polish. The ink for shoe polish is Givaldic. Maybe we could paint our tefillin with it. No, it's not made lishma. It's not allowed to be used. That's what Rashi says, top of the page. Sam, it's a dye, shetzovin bo min alim shchorim, that we use to dye our shoes black. Not allowed to use it for a sefer Torah. It has to be lishma v'chule. What about diphthera? We said that type of cloth is not allowed. What is that? It's dimaliach v'kamiach. It's been salted and it's been put in this flour water mixture. But velo afis, it hasn't gone through the final part of this where it's saturated in a finalizing liquid made from gallnuts. That is not considered good. And niyar is machka. This is papyrus. One is not allowed to use papyrus, which is peeled from a tree, I believe. That is not allowed to be used for the Megillah as well. Top of your Testament Aleph, second line down. It should take Suva Ashuris. How do we know that it has to be written in Ashuris? This validates what we said earlier, that it can be written in Ashuris and as well Yavanis, although Yavanis is not mentioned here. Lastly, on this section before the Mishnah, let's say through a video, we know that it has to be written on parchment and with ink. And how do we know this? Because Asya, we have a Gzera Shava Ksiva Ksiva. Ksiv Hacha by us, it says V'tikasev Esther Hamalka. But Ksiv Hasam, another pasuk, We're not going to get into the sugya there. We don't have time. But the pasuk says, "Vayomar lem baruch mipiv yikarei Eli." It's called Elev ani kosev al hasefer bidyo. And because of the gzera shavah from one to the next, we extrapolate that by the Megillah as well. It has to be b'sefer uvidyo. Next, the Mishnah says, Ben Ir shahalach lekrach. You have a city person who went to a walled city. Ben krach shahalach leir. Or you have a person who lived in a walled city who went to the big city. So we know they read on different days. Mukaf Choma reads on the 15th. Everybody else should read on the 14th. Says the Gemara, how do we know what he should do? He's visiting. So im asid lachzor lemekomo. If whoever is visiting plans to go back to where they came from, korei kimakomo, then they should follow the rules of their own home. Im lav korei mohen. And if they plan on staying forever, they're family, they're coming, whatever. They live in Mukaf Choma, but they're going to the Beit Shemesh, wherever they're going, so then they can stay and they have to read like that nation, like that city. So how much of the Megillah does one have to read to be Yotze? Reb Meir Omer Kula, you have to read the entire Mishnah to be the entire Megillah to be Yotze. Reb Yehuda Omer Me'ish Yehude from the second parak as we indicated by Mordechai. Reb Yehuda Omer Me'achar HaDevarim Ha'ela, which we'll discuss a little bit more in the Gemara. So 3 different shitas. We'll see a 4th momentarily in the Gemara, but 4 different shitas as to what parts of the Megillah must be read to be Yotze. The Gemara opens about 12 lines down. And your Testament Aleph, let's get to the bottom of the page. Amar Rava, we said that a Ben Ir that goes to a krach and a krach that goes to another city. It depends if he's going back or not. How much time? When is he going back to his city? Amar Rava, Lo Shanu, when did the halachos of the beginning of our Mishnah apply? Elash Asi Lachsar Belele Arba'as. You have to go back that night because you have a chiyuv to hear that night. If you're not going back that night, then you're considered like the person who lives in that new city, even if you're going back in the morning. You read like the city that you're visiting. So that would be the right way to do things. How do I know that what I'm saying is true? The pasuk has a repetitive language. It says prazos twice. Says the Gemara, the paros ben yomo nikra paros. That if you have a person who's from a city that's paros, then he's considered a ben yomo. That's great. Okay, Ashkechan Paros, a city person can be referred to as a Paros as a Ben Yomo implied from the pasuk. Mukaf Minalan. What about a person who goes to a Mukaf for one day? How can we assume that he is considered to be like a Mukaf Choma person? Says the Gemara, we don't need psukim for that. It's a svarahu. That's just rational. The Paros Ben Yomo Kari Paros. If a person who's a non-city walled city person is considered a Paros just for one day, then Mukaf Ben Yomo also Kari Mukaf. Beautiful. Says the Gemara, Vamarabba ben Kfar. What about a villager? What did we say about a villager that they go back to? The Yom HaKnisa, because they didn't have a lot of bezdin, they weren't very knowledgeable, they didn't know how to read, so they would always do this on a Monday and Thursday. They go back in time. That's why our Mishnah has, that's why we have so many days, because of the Yom HaKnisa, that people in the villages would be able to go back to the Monday or Thursday prior. So says Rava that if you have a villager who goes to the big city, so Ben Kachu Ben Kach Kori Imahem, he reads with the big city, my time. Why is it that we don't have the same rules of a Ben Kfar and a Ben Ir as we had for a Ben Ir and a Ben Krach? Says the Gemara, don't forget the leniencies that we learned earlier in the Masechta. My time, because this guy who is a Ben Kfar, he's really Kibnei Ir by Lemikre. Really, technically speaking, he should be reading like a Ben Ir. It's just that really, it was just that the only reason we were lenient is because they were bringing food to the cities, but Yom HaKnisa there, that was easier for them. Hanimili ki ise beduchte. That's the leniency only applies when the Ben Kfar is in his city. But if he's not in his city, Abal ki ise beir kibnei ir by lemikre. Abaye doesn't like this. Says the Gemara, a brisa, strange dialogue. Esve Abaye ben krach shahalach leir ben kachu ben kach. This does not fit with our Mishnah. What does this say? Someone from a walled city goes to the big city. Either way, he reads like the place where he's from. So says Abaye, I've learned our Mishnah. It can't be Ben Krach. It's a typo. Ben Krach Salka Daitach. We said in our Mishnah that Be'imasid Lachsor Tayyil said, oh, that just depends on whether or not you're going back to your city. It doesn't depend on anything else. So what is this language about Ben Krach? It has to be a mistake. It must be Ben Kfar. If it's Ben Kfar and the Bryce is talking about a Ben Kfar, then it implies not like Rava. Because if Abaye is right that this Bryce is talking about a Ben Kfar, so then it says Kore Kimikomo that he reads like his own city on the Yom HaKnisa. And Rava said it's not the Yom HaKnisa. He reads it on the day like the big city. Stira. So says the Gemara, Rava says back to Abaye, you just quoted me a brisa and changed the wording because you didn't like it. I'm going to do the same thing. He says, the lav trutze mitarsis, didn't you already give it your own answer? I'm going to feed it right back to you. You said it wasn't Ben Krach, it was Ben Kfar. So I'm going to tell you that it shouldn't say Kore Kimakom, it should say Tani, Kore Imahen. I'm just going to change the brisa just like you did so that it's not a conflict. From where do we read the Megillah? We'll get there before Mar. Says the Gemara, Tanya Rashbi Omer mi balai lahahu. This is a fourth shita that we had. The first three quoted in our Mishnah. We said Kula in our Mishnah. You have to read the whole thing. That was Reb Meir. Rabbi Huda said mi ishihudi. Rabbi Yossi said me'achar dvar ma'ela. And this new shita, 2/3 of the way down at the two dots, there in the name of Rashbi, it says mi balai lahahu. And Amar Rav Yochanan v'kulam mikra echad darshu. Everyone was understanding one pasuk when they came up with their shita. Remember, the conversation we're discussing is how much of the Megillah do you have to read in order to be Yotze. Says the Gemara, B'tikasev Esther Amalka Mordechai Hudi Av Kol Tokef. What does it mean Kol Tokef? Manda Amar Kula. According to Reb Meir in our Mishnah, says you have to read the whole Mishnah. Tokpo Shel Achashverosh. We're talking about the strength of Achashverosh, which is from the beginning of the book. That's Kula. Manda Amar Me'ishihudi. The one who says that we have to read from Ishihudi, that's because of Tokpo Shel Mordechai, and the part of Mordechai was from, relatively speaking, in Perek Beis. That's when he started to show up on scene. Manda Amar Me'achar Dvar Ma'ileh. That's talking about Tokpo Shel Haman. That's why you have to start from there. Manda Amar Balailu Rashbi. The sheet of Rashbi was Tokpo Shel Nes. When the miracle started, the pasuk says, "Mi balai lahu nodadosh nas hamelech." That's when all the miracles really started to play out. Mordechai all of a sudden became the Mishnah Lamelech because he ended up being carried by Haman. All the miraculous things that we saw, the subtext, all the psukim that we saw in the Gemara started playing out there. So that's the shita number one. That's pasuk number one, and all the four commentaries there. But Rav Huna, 4 lines before the wide line, says you're right about all the 4 shitas, but they have different sources. Rav Huna Amar Mehacha, it's from a different pasuk. Now we're going to play off this language. It says Umar Ra'u al kacha umahigia alehem. We're going to play off all 3 parts of this in order to understand this. Manda amar kula, according to Reb Meir in our Mishnah, says you have to read the whole entire thing to be yotze. Ma ra'a, play on the pasuk. Achashverosh nishtamish bekelim shel beis hamikdash. What was the mistake that Achashverosh used when he started to use the kelim at the beis hamikdash? His mistake was al kacha, play on the pasuk. Mishum dechashiv shivim shanan shnin velo ifrok. He made a mistake in the math. Remember the discussion about Shatzer, and he thought he corrected it. Even Daniel made a mistake in the math. Not so simple. What was the result of this error? The katal Vashti. Vashti ended up being killed. So therefore, a mayor holds it has to be the whole entire thing is read. First of the middle width lines. According to the one who says we have to start from Perek Beis, Ma Ra'a, Mordechai di Ikne B'Haman. What ended up happening was that Mordechai instigated a problem with Haman. Just lost my place, sorry. The Haman and al kacha, second of the white lines, al kacha deshavi nafshe avodah zar. What ended up happening? The reason why he wouldn't service Haman is because he was treated himself as avodah zar. My gelim, what was the result? So all the miracles took place. So Mordechai ended up not being the one who was hanged. According to the sheet in our Mishnah, Rabbi Yossi says that we're supposed to only read from the part from Haman and onwards. Why was Haman so angry with all the Jews? Al kacha. What happened? Because Mordechai was stubborn and keeping halacha. He has no desire to bow down to them. What ended up happening from there? And the last shita, according to Rashbi, who says that we have to read the Megillah only from Balaylahu. What ended up taking place that made him take out the Sefer HaZichronos? Remember the story from a few blot ago. The reason why he ended up taking out that book was because he was so bothered that Haman was there, and therefore he took out the book. And what was the result? He saw all the miracles that took place from there. Good. So those are the 2 different approaches as to why we have 4 shitas as to when we're supposed to read the Megillah, how much of it we're supposed to read, not when, but how much we're supposed to read. 6 lines from the bottom. We pass like Rav Meir that we are obligated to read the entire Megillah. The Ma'anaf Kamina, you walk in 2 psukim late. According to every other shita, you're yote. Just so Rav Meir says that you're not. So and even according to the shita of Ishihudi, the second shita, which we saw in our Mishnah, I think that was Rabbi Yehuda. Yep. Rabbi Yehuda says that from Ishihudi, he says ksuva kula. You still have to have the whole Megillah read. You have to have Perek Aleph written as well if you want to be Yotzei the Megillah. Megillah's nikreis sefer v'nikreis igeres. The Megillah has both the status of a sefer. It also has the status of an igeres. What are the features of each of these? Nikreis sefer. The reason why the halacha that would be similar between a sefer Torah and the Megillah is as follows: Shim tafra b'chutei pishtam psula. That if you use pishtan, it's usher to use that. It has to be animal parts. You're not allowed to use anything else. And v'nikreis igeres, that it is considered like an igeres in the following way: that if you put in 3 threads, then it is considered kosher. That they have to be in thirds. What is this talking about? So if you can imagine that you have a book like this and you're trying to put up a binding, it's a Megillah though, it's a scroll. So this is page 1 of the parchment and this is page 2. Normally, halachically, when you have a Sefer Torah, you have to stitch top to bottom. However, when it's an Igeres, you don't have to do that. You only have to put in 3 stitches. 1, 2, 3, but they have to be equidistant. That's the last piece of the Gemara. They have to be 4 sections with 3 stitches in the middle. That's kosher for an Igeris and not a Sefer Torah. That's that last line that we just learned, that Amar Rav Nachman that it has to be in thirds, not thirds, and it has to be equidistant, 3 stitches from top to bottom. We're going to stop right here. We'll pick up on Shabbos morning with Amar Rav Yehuda 3 lines from the bottom. Wishing you all a beautiful night.